Darrell Martin, you've been in the film and television industry for more than 25 years. What's the first thing you think of when you win a job? Is it the camera you're going to use, the lighting setup, the lenses?
Generally, it's the first thing you ask, I think, to determine all that is what is the look of the show, because that will dictate what gear you get. And often producers, well, they're not technically minded, that's why they hire you, but they'll talk in broad strokes. I had one producer on a show say, we were doing a show about sex workers, and it was, he described it as wanting to be the David Jones of brothels. And you think, wow, what does that mean? So the first thing you do is you head off to David Jones and have a look around at all the lighting, and we actually headed off to a couple of brothels as well, and it was the total reverse. So a great lesson is don't go for the reality if the reality looks appalling, because most of the rooms in brothels are really dark and really dimly lit. In fact, some of them, I asked them what their light levels would be, and they put set the lights. You could hardly see your hand in front of your face. It was that dark. So clearly that wasn't going to work for our show. But when you walk into something like David Jones, it's well lit, it's got this great feeling of, oh, this feels nice, it's got lots of clean lines, the place looks spick and span, and immediately you start getting an idea of, okay, this is what they sort of mean. And so you head off in that direction. So you'll look at how you can use colour and how you can use soft light and all those sort of things. And you'll design a package knowing of lenses and cameras, knowing how you're going to actually light it and shoot it.
So the producers say to you, we want an aspirational look, for example.
Yeah, well, funny enough, exactly that. I did a job a couple of years ago, and the producers said, we want these girls to be aspirational. We want young women to aspire to be these girls. And so you think, well, okay, what does that mean? So you sit down with a designer and they talk about the look of each of the characters and their houses and what their homes might consist of, and they might even have a little swatch thing of colours and brands that the girls might buy, and you look at those and you think, right, okay, I know, I've got an idea of how they're going to sit and look in their houses and how I'm going to light them to that effect. And then from that, you go, okay, well, it'd be great to have these lenses, and knowing that you've got to shoot 8 minutes a day, it's probably best not having a bunch of primes just to do it. I'll need a couple of zoom lenses and so on, and I'll need cameras that are pretty, mobile to get around these sets and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, you've got a great idea in your head of what sort of package you want to use based on the look of the show and the schedule you've been given to shoot it in.
So at that point, do you then just go to the first day of shooting, or does the executive producer, want to see what your interpretation of aspirational means before you start shooting? Oh,
very much so. In fact, one of the things we did for, this series about a bunch of women that were in a brothel was the lead director, Ken Cameron, and I knew that there were usually about 5 or 6 sex scenes per episode. And we sat down and we thought, well, how are we going to shoot these, and how are we going to make the actors who have been cast comfortable about shooting these? So we went away and we collectively looked at all our favourite films that had what we thought were good sex scenes in them, and by that, well shot, that weren't always exploitive, that helped propel the story and so on. And we compiled, I think, about 10 or 12 scenes from different films. And showed not only the producers, showed the executive producers, and showed the cast. And once the cast saw people like Sharon Stone and Diane Lane and all these really well-known actors basically get their gear off, they felt a lot more comfortable doing it. And also it allowed us to, I looked at other shows, and I took things from films. I took scenes from Bertolucci's Conformist and said, I want to light some of the brothel like this. And it was great because it then entered a discussion on visual style that they could immediately see. You weren't talking sort of vague kind of notions. I think I'll use slashes of light with colour, or, okay, show me an example. There it is. And so that was great, and that put everybody, I think, at ease. We also shot a lot of tests. We went into the nightclub we were using for the brothel in the first series, shot colours. I usually try and grab one of the office people and say, can they just come down for a couple of hours and sit in front of the camera? and we'll shoot some tests with this person. It's usually someone with good skin, so they can get an idea of skin tones. And we sit there and we'll just look at different gel packs in different colours, different lights, and look at ideas that we want to use for the show. And that's how that tends to evolve. And now I do it with every show. I'll sit down and make what I call a style reel. And sometimes it's based, if it's second or third series, sometimes it's based on things that worked well in the first series. So instead of, in fact, on Satisfaction, I think the style reel for the second series was scenes from the first series that we thought worked particularly well. And that's become a great way of breaking the ice with new directors. It's also a great way of sitting down with the art department and being able to say, well, that worked, that didn't work, can we do more of this, can we do less of that, and so on and so forth.
Do you ever shoot a show where you've decided on a look, all of you as a collective, and then change your mind midway through? Not so much on the look. The look sometimes does evolve because you find things that work better. And if you look, it's interesting, if you look at a lot of your long-running series, you often see that they just get better and quicker at doing the things that worked well. If you took, say, a stylistic series like Breaking Bad, it starts well and they really went hard-hitting in their look from day one, and they managed to keep that going all the way through, which I think's a fantastic feat. But things do evolve. Again, on Satisfaction, we did a thing called backwinding. The director of the second series that kicked off the second series, Paul Maloney, came in and said, I want to do something that shows this character's fractured state of mind. What can we do? And I just, luckily, a couple of years ago, seen Man on Fire, Tony Scott film, where Denzel Washington's character, who's an ex, I think he's ex-CIA, and he's as a drunk, and he has these horrible flashback moments and moments where he doesn't know where he is. And they did a lot of backwinding where they physically wound the camera backwards and then forwards. So when they played it, it sort of had a really stuttered effect, and the time was all over the place, and his face would sort of twitch and move, and I thought that'd be perfect for what we did. So we brought that in on the second series, I think, and continued it on for the third as well, and used it, I think, hopefully to great effect. Sadly, you can't do that much anymore because we don't shoot on film. That was my next question. How do you do that digitally? I'm sure they can. I'm sure that somebody will probably bring out a software package. There's something. It was quite an analog effect too. You never quite knew what you were going to get. Sometimes you'd backwind it too far and the results would look too hazy. But generally, you just did enough of it, and the editor would pick all the good bits, and then from that you had a really good kind of sequence. But that was fun too, because there was always the excitement of what's it going to look like, and you waited till rushes to find out. Now with digital, everything's immediate. You can sort of see it the moment you finish shooting it. Even 100 frame stuff, even slow-mo stuff, you just play it back in slow-mo on the camera and you can see exactly what you've done. So the camera, the lighting, the lenses, is there any one particular combination that tells a story better than another combination? No, absolutely not. I think it's whatever. I think if the story's right, you can shoot something on Super 8 if it's the right look you're going for, and it'll still be terrific. It'll be very hard to shoot. But I think really it should always be that the content dictates the style rather than just putting style over content. In fact, you often see films that you think, oh, that didn't really work, and when you look at it you think it's because they enforced a style upon a story that probably didn't need that, and therefore didn't ring true or took you out of the story. And I think as cinematographers are storytellers, and I think the most important thing you must do is immerse the viewer in the world that you're creating and not take them out. I remember making a film once and some friends came and said, oh, that was a really pretty shot in there. And I thought, whoa, that obviously took you out of the story to notice that. That's not necessarily a good thing. And sometimes things can be well shot and really gritty and people just don't notice, but it's right for the story. Where you don't want to make people look good, you want to make them look, like they're part of their environment. With so much information bombarding us every day,
iPads, iPhones, internet, the whole lot, a viewer's attention span's a little bit shorter than what they used to be, and so that scenario there is a dangerous scenario where if you lose someone out of the story, it's difficult to get them back again.
Maybe. I think the platform. I think there's two thoughts now. I think the fact that we're viewing television on bigger screens, as in our domestic sets are no longer these small little 4x3 boxes. They're often, they're 55, 60, 70-inch plasma and LED and LCD screens that are just enormous. And often you're reminding directors and producers that perhaps we don't need as many close-ups because people are watching stuff on a bigger screen, and a two-shot is lovely to look at when you can look at the person talking and look at the other person who's reacting to that person talking. Like a lot of cinematic sort of things that you see, particularly a lot of older films hold on long shots a lot longer than we thought are necessary, and yet they hold beautifully.
Do you think that there's an overabundance of getting caught up in technology as cinematographers, overcomplicating things? Absolutely.
I think it's interesting. I saw a workshop John Seal did recently on the latest Mad Max film, and he said, that's my mantra, keep it simple. Give me a bunch of zooms and a bunch of good cameras. I'll keep it, and I'll be able to shoot fast and get more shots which tell a story. I think particularly in today's HD world, people bandy around things like full HD and 1080p and on all these terms, when really they mean very little. What you should be looking at is things like the compression ratio of that 1080p. And it's very easy to be swept up with new technology for the sake of technology, but really, as long as it's serving the story and you're able to get good pictures out of it quickly and efficiently, that to me is the most important thing.
Where does Darrell Martin draw his inspiration from?
Good question. Look, I tend to draw inspiration from other films, mainly other films, I'd say, or things that you watch that inspire you. Often art, music, a lot of TV shows. Often, you look at it and you think, how do they do that in that time? That is just fantastic. Books, it can be a multitude of things. Obviously, a lot of things. It could be even just a pretty sunset, or you'll walk out in autumn and watch the way that the light's catching the leaves on the tree.
So that's the input phase. What about the output phase? How does that materialise in your work?
Sometimes you're trying to replicate something you've seen, or even if it's in your mind's eye. Sometimes it's the way sun comes through a window and hits a room, and you might think, oh, I'll remember that because that looks so naturalistic. And particularly when you're in a studio, when you're trying to create real looking sunlight, it's often one of the most hardest things to do. So you'll sit there and work away at it till you think it looks naturally lit.
What's your style? Do you have a style?
All cinematographers hope that they don't have a style. You hope that the style is the one that you put, that you impress upon the story, that you create for whatever show or whatever film you're doing. The reality is there's probably things that that work, that you can do quickly, that you resort to, particularly when push comes to shove and it's the end of the day. And maybe that does result in a bit of a style. I know there's always a discussion about which side you key from. Do you key from camera side, or do you key from the opposite side of camera? And they're things that sometimes over time, I know a couple of cinematographers I worked with early in my career, they keyed one side of camera and they've since changed. So maybe styles do change, but you like to think you don't have a style, that you can basically create one for whatever type of show or thing that you're doing.
So Wes Anderson, as soon as you mention Wes Anderson, you automatically think style.
Oh, absolutely. And you think very proscenium arch and everything's very centered frame, and he does. He has a very particular theatrical look, which is art directed within an inch of its life. If you've ever tried to actually replicate that, you realise how brilliantly he's done it, because it's not easy to do. It needs to happen from the planning stages. You need to design your shots from the get-go, and you need to design your sets and your action around that. I don't think you could just turn up on the day and hope for the best that you're necessarily going to get it, because things like someone coming through a doorway, unless the door's in the right place, you won't be able to get that effect. It's brilliantly done when you look at it and actually work out how he's done it.
So are you saying that if you have a particular style that it's potentially going to hold you back? Not
necessarily. There are a couple of cinematographers I know that I won't say invented the short focus where everything was really narrow focus, but early in their careers did very well out of it because people liked that look and it worked very well for commercials, and they've taken that on to other things in feature film. So I think particularly in commercial world, people do get known for their style and get employed because of it.
Given the advances in technology over the 25 years that you've been in the game, would you rather have started your career back 25 years ago or today?
I think if I'd started it back 25 years ago, the leap to digital would have been a lot harder. It's been very easy for me because I started the ABC where it was half film, half videotape. So it wasn't, things like timecode, when timecode came in and so on, weren't really big stretches, and HD was just really good looking video.
What do you miss about those early days? Because they seemed like the halcyon days of film and television. What do you miss about them?
I think everybody seems to, everyone looks back at their career and seems to think the golden years are always the ones where they're starting out. I don't know that I necessarily miss anything. I think I was very grateful for being there when things were starting to change and starting to turn to the other side. There was a period where I think video wasn't very good. It was very much the poor cousin to film, and it's been a delight in the last 5 years to watch digital almost overtake film. When I say almost, that in the back of my mind I still think that film is the ultimate acquisitional form, but it's the most costly, and I really think probably that 90-something% of audiences can't tell the difference. So from a producing point of view and an accountancy point of view, it's a very hard thing to be able to push when your budgets can be tight, and you can perhaps get 2 cameras for the price of 1, and film stock's so expensive and processing so expensive now and hard to do. There aren't many labs left in the world.
You started as a trainee cameraman at the ABC more than 25 years ago. What are your memories of those early days?
They were great because they had 3 studios at the ABC, and they were all running to peak capacity, and sometimes they were even running on the weekends because there was so much program making being done. They had Countdown on Friday nights for sort of like a record to tape as if it was live. So, when you finished whatever you're doing and you go in there, you'd see Grace Jones or Tina Turner or Boy George or something like, or Howard Jones playing in the studio. So they were quite exciting times, and you could go up to videotape, and there was this smell. I can't quite describe it, but there's a definite smell that video has, particularly as the oxide's going along the tape heads and shearing off. And it was an exciting time. Technology was still starting to change. A videotape was going from 2-inch to 1-inch to half-inch. The early beta cams were just around the corner. Things were getting smaller and more compact, not necessarily lighter, I might add. So it was great. They were great times, and film was still quite strong. If you wanted, there was a lot of film drama still being shot. So it was a very busy and very productive place.
I'd like to mention a few names, and I thought that I might just get your reaction to those names.
Right.
George Lucas.
Amazing. I mean, who can forget seeing Star Wars for the first time if you saw it in the cinema? Those opening shots of the spaceship, flying overhead were truly breathtaking. And I think for anybody that's working in film and TV, that was a 12-year-old boy as I was, would have to rate it as one of their biggest influences, because it was such a powerhouse film. It made you feel good about life and about, you know, about the power of what cinema can do, and it was an incredible emotive journey.
John Carpenter?
I started out shooting my own Super 8 films, and one thing I loved was that John Carpenter was a writer, director. He didn't shoot his own films, but he did his own music. So he was one of the true American auteurs of the 70s and 80s that made low-budget films that were uncompromising, because he generally stayed away from the big studio budgets that meant he had to kowtow and do it their way. So he made some really great, exciting films at the time. Things like Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing. They were amazing pieces of cinema.
Dean Semler?
Dean Semler, I remember going to see, I think it was Razorback. I'd already seen The Road Warrior, and I saw Razorback, and at that time I think I wanted to direct. I think because I was writing, shooting my own little, you know, amateur type films, and I saw Razorback and realised it wasn't actually the direction I wanted to be doing. It was the cinematography, and his cinematography in that film, which I think he won an AFI award for, was simply stunning. And that was when I realised I want to be a cinematographer.
And lastly, Don McAlpine.
I met Don McAlpine about 5 years ago, very briefly they had an ACS, which is the Australian Cinematography Society's 50th get-together in Sydney. And a few years prior to that, I was trying to find, I invented a style reel for a kids show I was doing, and one of the things I put on it was a film that Don had shot called Peter Pan, which was this PJ Hogan film, which he'd used this magnificent colour blue for the moonlight stuff, and I really wanted to find out what colour it was. In the end, we sort of replicated it. And I met Don for the first time, and I said, I was trying to find out what colour he used for that film. And I loved his response. His response was, "Oh, mate, you should have rung me," which I just thought was so endearing, because I probably wouldn't have had the nerve at the time to just cold call somebody like that. But I loved that. It was such an Aussie response, and I thought, and that's why you get the work, because you're just so lovable, and what you do just looks so amazing.
I know story is all important to you, but what's your favourite camera with which to capture that story?
At the moment, it's hard to look past the Alexa, the Arri Alexa. It's the most film-like camera of all the digital cameras I think I've used. It's built to function like a film camera. You can't get into the menus and play around with things, whereas a lot of the other brands' cameras, you can get into that engineering menu and you can make black be white and white to be black, and you can get yourself in terrible trouble if you start playing it. But the great thing about the Alexa, it has such a good look. You really don't want to touch much to it. I generally just warm up the image a little bit later on and use a bit of diffusion so it doesn't look too sharp. But generally it looks so fantastic. And I would say if there was singly a film camera, a film killer, a camera that came along that killed film, it was the Alexa.
Lenses?
Look, I tend to generally use zooms because they get the job done just that little bit faster. I love the Panavision Primos. There's an Alexa, there's an Arri Fujinon series that have come out, the 18-80 and the 45-250, made by Arri and Fujinon, are pretty hard to go past. Canon have brought out some quite compact long zooms, which are good. There are so many really great lenses out there, and every week you're pretty much reading about somebody who's invented a new range or a new lens, which is terrific.
Natural or artificial light?
Well, you like to think that if you light artificially, it looks natural, and that's, I think, one of the easiest things to say and one of the hardest things to do. Sven Nykvist, who shot a lot of Ingmar Bergman's films, was one of the first cinematographers that basically tried to make everything look naturalistic. And when you tried to do it yourself, you realise how hard it was. He made it look so easy, and yet it looked it was actually quite incredible to do. Because potentially every new light source you bring in is a new shadow. And in life, there's rarely more than one shadow, unless you've got multiple lights in a room. I mean, the sun just gives you one big hard shadow. And so to replicate that effect can be very complex.
Your CV reads like a bit of a who's who of Australian film and television. Mr. and Mrs. Murder, Winners and Losers, Satisfaction, as you've already mentioned, Stingers. Do you have a favourite? And if so, why?
I think they're all like your children in that respect. It's very hard to choose. But looking back, I think Satisfaction would be one of the ones that I enjoyed the most. It was because it was so different to everything else. Also, it allowed us to create a new look for a show that hadn't really had that sort of stylistic look before it. It was also the last series I shot on film. And at the time, of course, you think, oh, there'll be another, like something else will come along. And of course, nobody at the time tells you this. You don't know when your last job's going to be on film. It just happens, and then one day you realise it was. So in that respect, I guess I hold that a little bit dear for that reason. And it was an incredible bunch of people that worked on it. It was also because of the very nature of it. There was a real feeling of trust there, that people were really trusting you to look after them, and it was fabulous. It was just a fabulous show to work on.
What do you mean exactly by they were banking on you to look after them?
We were doing a lot of sex scenes, and therefore the cast naturally feel very vulnerable, male and female. And so you're always trying to hide the bits that you don't want the camera to see, and make the bits that you do see look good. And let's face it, not many of us really look good with our clothes off, so or feel that we look good with our clothes off, even though most of the cast in that show had nothing to worry about. But everybody feels vulnerable naturally. So you're always trying to do the right thing and placate people and make them, most importantly, feel comfortable that they can do anything. You're creating an environment where they feel very natural, and that you're actually a family. It's not a bunch of people that have come together for a job to make something, that you're actually family and they can trust you.
So how do you do that exactly? Because I would imagine that you would have to prove to them by showing them what you've filmed, what you've shot, that you are looking after them. Is that how you did it?
Actually, it happened in reverse, that things were storyboarded. The shots that the directors wanted to do with the sex scenes, they wanted to actually storyboard them, and they would sit there with the producer and the actor, and they would take photos in rehearsals and say, now we're going to do this, I'm going to be shot here of this, and we'll see you to here or whatever, and they would carefully choreograph it. So, and then they'd bring the storyboards in, or you'd look at them and you go, yeah, we can do that. And if it varied from that, you'd make sure that it was cool with everybody, that that's what you're going to do. If you had to combine shots because of time or whatever, that everyone was comfortable with it. And it worked very well.
You've been in the game 25 years, more than 25 years. Where do you think we'll be 25 years hence?
I think distribution will change. I think, as you mentioned earlier, everybody's looking at a lot more material now, because there's more cable channels, but also too we've got iPads where we can look at high definition images on. People are looking at movies on their smartphones, on iPods even. So I think content, there'll always need to be fresh content, and if anything, I think we'll need more of it. You'd like to think things will get smaller and more compact, but whereas a lot of HD cameras are concerned, the reverse is true. They've got bigger and heavier. We've gone back to 35mm formats, so our lens package is physically bigger and physically heavier. It's a lot better image quality, obviously, because there's a lot more glass, but they're the things, I think 20 years ago you would have thought, oh no, we'll be using, camera the size of our phones. And perhaps we will be. The technology, I'm sure, will get there. But durability and all that sort of stuff comes into question, particularly with broadcast gear, because it's fine to say I can shoot this on my little camera or whatever, but it's not going to last 3 years of the heavy use you might have on, say, a TV series. So things do need to be built robustly, and they need to be built to last.
What about the storytelling process? Do you think that will change in 25 years?
I still think a good story is a good story. I think the way it'll be shot will be different, and I think maybe styles will change from here and there, but I still think that, you know, from the old prehistoric times of, you know, people sitting around a campfire talking up a story, a good story is a good story no matter what formats it's shot on. And I think the secret of particularly TV drama is if it's compelling, people will watch it.
You were somewhat lucky in the sense that when you started at the ABC more than 25 years ago, there was a traineeship. I think it was called POT from memory, POTS. They just don't exist anymore, do they? So given that, what do people who are trying to get into the industry, like you were 25 years ago, what do they need to do today to try and get up that ladder?
I think if I was starting my time again now, I'd get on a camera crew somewhere, either as the video split operator or the data wrangler, and just work my way up from there. I think that's very important. It gives you an idea of the hours that you're going to work. It gives you an idea of on-set etiquette, which I think is very important on a production. And it gives you ideas of, particularly when you reach the cinematography, the top spot, of what everybody else in the department do and what they need. It's interesting watching a lot of film school graduates who go straight out to start shooting as cinematographers, and more the power to them. But you can see sometimes that there's often gaps in their understanding of what some of the members of their own department actually do. And it's very easy to know that if you've actually worked your way up the ladder. It's very important to shoot as much as you can, even as with your iPhone, and edit. I think editing a story together to realise what you need coverage-wise is singularly the most important thing you can do as a filmmaker. To understand rhythm, to understand how shots go together, to understand coverage is paramount, particularly as a cinematographer, because you can be walking around with a director, and there are directors who are terribly efficient as far as being technically proficient with what they like. You know, you can get one director says, I want a 25mm here, I want to start here and end here, then I want to come around and go on the 75 and get a close-up from there, and so on. And there are other directors that know how they want to work their actors, and then we'll turn to you and go, so what do you think? How do you see the coverage here? And as a cinematographer, you've got to have a plan and know that it's going to cover the story well and with the wishes of what the director wants. So you're not going to get that if you've never put something together yourself. And all the time you're editing what you're shooting in your head to think, is this shot going to go with this? And often you'll sit there and go, you know what, we really need a shot of that reverse or that cutaway to such and such to get us, to bridge us from this shot to that shot, because it could be an ugly cut. And they're things you've got to know and be right about, because it's too late in the edit when the director realises they haven't got enough coverage, or the coverage they have got doesn't cut together. So my advice would be to shoot as much as you can and edit and finish it. Put music to it or voiceover or whatever you can do, but work out what works and what doesn't work. And I think a bad film that you do is as important as making a good film, because you can realise what goes into it and what you should have perhaps done next time. And hopefully there is a next time, and you go out and you shoot something, and everything you do hopefully incrementally gets better.
In some ways it's the hardest time to be a filmmaker because there's so much competition out there, but in other ways it's the easiest time to be a filmmaker because there's so many platforms to show your work. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and I think the tools are a lot easier. When I started back in the 80s, there was Super 8 and there was 16mm and 35mm. Video was at its infancy, was horrendously expensive and frankly not very good. So the cheapest option was to make a lot of your Super 8 extravaganzas as I did. And you could edit at home. Yes, it'd be a little rough and so on, but at least you could do that. But to have all the things you have now, I mean, you've got, you know, high def on your phone, even to be able to shoot something and then edit it slickly in a computer without seeing the horrible tape splices that we used to have and the sound jumping around, because the sound led, I think, 16 frames in front of your vision, so you always had to cut it a bit loose. I mean, there's extraordinary things you can do on a home computer now. So in that respect, it's a lot easier. In other respects, it's a lot harder because maybe the competition is fiercer. But there's a lot more avenues for delivery now. I mean, you've got the old wide world of the web to put your stuff on and be seen. So there's a greater, I think there's also a bigger need now. I mean, educational docos on how to do things, you know, there are just so many more avenues to get your stuff shown too. And yes, that can be daunting, but I think if I had my time, if I could have my time now, have it back when I had it, I'd much prefer it now.
Well, Darrell Martin, we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.